this like terminal uniqueness of thinking that I'm just completely unlovable.
Yeah.
And all of this energy that I had been suppressing is desperate to come out. At that time, it's starting to, and I can't control it. And so it's like, shove it down even more.
As we unwrap this, we tell the whole story, the good, bad, and the ugly, and the parts of what internally was deceiving you, the lies that we believed, all those things.
For the first time, I didn't care about anything. I was free from all the voices that I had since I was a young kid of like that pressure. The words I used then were woman trapped in a man's body. I had started abusing laxatives. I ate like 3 foods and became very underweight. But I was sober, unbelievably depressed, constantly struggling with suicidal thinking. I'm 10 years sober, but I can't even function. I was sitting, the water had become cold. It was actually causing the blood to coagulate. That's actually probably what saved me, or it is what saved me.
Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. I'm Patrick Custer, your host, and so very glad to be sitting here today with our guest and my friend, Joslyn Defreece.
Hello.
Welcome to Nashville, first of all.
Thank you.
And gosh, I'm so excited to be here with you. We are going to dive deep and go quick because there is your story's deep. And I know enough to know that I don't want to miss out on any piece of it. How did you get exposed to, it's very rare that I talk to somebody that's just like, wow, I just decided I was going to stick my finger down my throat. But because a lot of the time it's somebody's like, hey,
a lot of people, I'm 42 and, there was an actor that was like, I don't know, Tracy Gold. Do you know who that is?
Familiar name, but
she was on, I can't remember, like maybe Growing Pains or something like that.
Okay. Yes.
And there was like a movie of the week kind of thing of like her story. And it was like showing her like her struggle with bulimia. But I watched that and I saw it and I was like, huh. And what's sad is that's a story of someone hurting themselves. But all I could see is that she got this result.
Right.
I was like, well, who cares if I hurt myself? I'm already hurting. I mean, that's the truth.
Right.
I was already in so much pain, and my brain wasn't developed. So that belief that if I can just get the body that I'm supposed to have, little did my little self know, little did I know that, so much is trying to be hidden.
Oh,
it's like, I was just trying to hide my essence of who I am. And it started from this kind of, I'm going to pretend to be sick. Cause I didn't want to go to school cause I was like, and I knew that I knew how to make myself throw up. And so I did that to pretend to be sick. And I did it for a week. And after a week, actually like a family friend saw me and goes, "Oh, you're so skinny. What you need, and I went and I weighed myself and I saw the difference. And it was like off to the races.
Right. It was all the things you needed to hear and the social affirmation too.
And it was, it was a horrible time. And
I always think it's extremely important when talking to somebody about their eating disorder, just like when you were at that tender age, you witnessed what was going on with someone else's, that we, as we unwrap this, we tell the whole story because the good, bad, and the ugly, and the parts of what internally was deceiving you, the lies that we believed, all those things. So, I'd like to know if you're willing to share with us, what was going on in your brain about this newfound way to cope.
Right. Definitely. I mean, I felt like I had found the answer to everything. I felt like I had a secret now that could control exactly what the problem was. Because in my mind, there was only one problem. And that problem was that I was chubby or I didn't look a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't accepted. So if I can just control the intake of my food, I can control my body, I can control my weight, and I can control the way the world sees me. Mm-hmm. And, little did I know that meanwhile, I'm also going through an incredible amount of emotional pain around sexuality, around gender identity. And I was finding a way to suppress that unknowingly. Like I was, okay, in my mind, I'm just controlling food over here. Mm-hmm. But I'm also finding this way of like purging the pain, mm-hmm. purging what I'm feeling inside, purging all those feelings. And it lasted maybe 6 months before I got caught, before I got kind of reprimanded and was like sent to the principal's office to go. I was forced to eat my lunch every day in front of the principal.
What was it like getting caught?
I remember, this is what's crazy. I remember feeling relieved that I was caught.
Really?
Because I remember feeling so alone and feeling so scared because I did feel like something was just incredibly wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And I remember being caught and thinking, scared, but also like, no, something's wrong. Like, I wouldn't have understood that it was a cry for help, but looking back and looking at that little kid, like I wanted help so badly.
Yeah.
And that was like probably 1996. And it was like first of all, like I was presenting as a boy. I was living as a teenage boy in Omaha, Nebraska in 1996.
Yeah.
First of all, eating disorders don't exist for boys.
Right.
And we can't talk about anything that's actually going on. Mm-hmm. So it's just this depression issue. It's this, go to a counselor, talk once a week, not really talk about what's going on. Never.
But did you not get actually honest about
sexuality? It was not. I was completely incapable of being honest about sexuality.
Makes sense.
And I had suppressed so deeply any issues around gender. Mm. I remember sitting I grew up Catholic, and I went to Catholic school. And once or twice a week, we went to church. And I remember sitting in church in the front pew. And it was like the last Friday of the month, which was like Spirit Day or something. And everyone dressed up. And I remember looking at all the girls' dresses and thinking, if I, like, just fantasizing about what I would wear. And being like 13 years old, and getting really sad because thinking that just couldn't be. But I remember doing that all the time, just sitting there and picturing what I would wear, and I want to wear that dress and all this stuff. And like when I go back to that and I think of that, I had this picture of what I was supposed to be. And then there was who I really was. And thinking that I had to be that this was impossible. And so oftentimes when I'm going to this place of like deep spirituality and connection and desperately wanting to be a good Catholic kid, I would just sit there and be like, this part of me, like, I would just kind of fantasize, and I'd find connection in that and peace in that. But I would have to sit alone with that. Mm-hmm. And then I would leave and go walk out in the world and try to be this. Mm-hmm. And that was the reason for the eating disorder. I mean, you know, there's a multitude of reasons, but in my mind, that seems so clear. Like, oh, I was using every bit of energy to fit the mold. And, you know, it was, okay, I'm controlling my body, but really what I'm doing is I'm suppressing every feeling that I'm having.
Yeah.
Because it was too much for me. And, you know, that after I got caught and kind of was being watched after every meal, and it wasn't talked about really, it was just, don't do it. I found exercise. And then I was in high school and I went to an all guys boarding school, and I was running cross country. Mm-hmm. And I had found new bulimia. I had found the ability to eat whatever I wanted if I just went and ran 5 or 7 miles.
Which many people don't know that there's various forms of bulimia, one of them which being where
purging through exercise.
Yes.
Like using kind of, you know, oh, I can eat this if I do this.
And the math is that you always, like, when you're counting the calories, there's always a surplus of expended calories, right?
Yeah.
You're going overboard with the expenditure.
It's like, you know, it was this kind of, again, a new way of suppressing my feelings. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm still like an active person. I still exercise a lot, but I try to exercise very intentionally, mm-hmm. and have like connection to my body and awareness of my body. When I was a kid and running, it was about going harder, about suppressing. And I think about the tension that I had in my mind, just the tension I had in my body, and the way that I would just run and run and run until I felt sick. And it was like, you know, it's definitely a metaphor for what I was feeling. Mm-hmm. You know, running from my emotions, running from everything I'm feeling, and again, controlling my body. And, you know, it was at that point too where my sexuality just, I couldn't deny that I was attracted.
Did you say you were 15 at this point? Yeah.
Attracted to boys.
Yeah.
And, you know, those thoughts of being a princess or being a girl that I had as a child were so removed. Like, in the back of my mind, if I remember that, I was like, oh yeah, but that's because I like boys. I just always connected the two. I was like, oh, I like boys. That's why I dressed up like a little girl. That's why I always wished I was a little girl.
And that's what society that's what society told us from our generations, is that, like, oh, okay, well, if you're gay, that's why.
I can say that when I first came out as trans, I was like, oh, trans women are gay men that just can't cut it, so they have to like dress up. I remember thinking that from watching these, you know, the talk shows in the 80s and 90s, and seeing trans women on there, and it was like, oh, your girlfriend is actually your boyfriend, or, you know, like these kind of sensational, horrible stories of just humiliating these people, and at the entertainment and at the expense, just seeing this as a kid and thinking that, that would be the last thing I would ever want to be. And feeling the shame inside that because there was somewhere inside of me that knew that felt like me.
So speaking of metaphors, there's the ones that go along with restricting, but especially with going along with purging and ridding yourself of something. Was there a connection there?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, when it was either purging through vomiting or purging through exercise, there was this desperate need to get rid of everything. Because I mean, if I look at it, I'm like, I was holding the weight of the world on my shoulders at such a young age. I felt like there was so much wrong. And I have, very loving parents, and I have a very loving extended family. And, but there was the voices of society that were just weighing down on me. And the expectations of masculinity and the expectations of just of what it meant to be a little boy, or what it was to become a young man. And I didn't fit those. And so it was like, I had to get rid of that pain. I had to get rid of all of that pressure and alleviate it. And it's like a balloon, and I had to pop it.
Yeah.
And, in terms of bulimia versus like restriction, because I've fluctuated between binging, purging, restricting all throughout my career as, a person with an eating disorder. There was always this sense of suppressing, getting rid of, whether that was like pushing the feelings down, control over, denying hunger. I later, after my brain is all over, I first got into recovery let me go back. So when I was around 16 and I'm, doing all this running and running from my feelings, running from, literally and metaphorically running, I found drugs and alcohol. And for the first time, I didn't care about anything. I was free from all the voices that I had since I was a young kid of like that pressure. And again, everything just went calm. And then I found drugs and alcohol, and it was a career of, a short career, because it was like 16 to 20. And
mine was 4 years too.
Really?
Yeah. It was a little later. Mine was 20 to 24, but
yeah.
Yep. I don't know that I could have lasted even a year longer.
Mine went so fast and hard, and, corresponded with me coming out as gay, being the first boy at my all guys high school to take a guy to prom, and first person to be openly gay. I spoke to the faculty about what it was like to be openly gay, and I did a play where I spoke about being the first, or being openly gay in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm telling all these stories with pride, but I was drunk and high, and I was numbing all of it. I was suppressing all of it.
So were you at that addiction state where you were using through the day, or?
Not drinking. But I was smoking pot, like in high school. And then when I graduated high school, so 18, that's when drugs, like heavier drugs, because I moved from Nebraska to New York City. And it was all of a sudden, it became bigger than me. and it interfered with my day-to-day life, and I needed it. And I also was dating a boy, and in order to be intimate, we had to be drunk. And he identified as straight, and he would say things like, you know, I feel like you're just a really cool girl, not a guy. And I got so furious with him. And he's actually passed away now. He committed suicide, and I'm pretty sure from drugs and alcohol. But he was kind of the beginning of the turn, where it was like acknowledging something that I had been suppressing. He saw something in me when my guard came down, when I was free of all the voices. It was insane. I mean, I was like all this craziness going on, but I definitely was, there was moments of absolute clarity. And I mean, the truth is, like, could be controversial, but I'll say it anyways. I took acid in 2001, first day of spring, 2001. And for the first time I said out loud that I was, the words I used then were a woman trapped in a man's body. And, you know, I mean, there's reasons why LSD have been used therapeutically because, you know,
there's no need to justify people have had life-altering experiences and moments of clarity and realization on all forms of substances, including acid, because when that mental block isn't there, you know.
And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that moment of saying to my best friend, like, I'm a girl, not a boy. Like, it was so clear. And after I'd said that, I couldn't really take it back. I tried.
Right.
I tried. I was like, oh no, I was just high. Like, that wasn't real. And you know, within a month of that, I was watching MSNBC, and I saw this episode, and this trans woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, and looking very similar to me, is telling her story. And I knew that it was real. And within a week of that, I went and told my parents, and I used for one more year, because I was 19. I used drugs and alcohol for one more year, and then I just hit rock bottom. Because I was, at that point then, I was using with an excuse. If you were trans, if you were going through this, if you know, poor me, you know. And
what did your eating disorder and your addiction look like, if you were to describe it, that last period?
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Completely out of control. Like, all of the efforts I had taken around my body and eating disorder, I had lost control of. All of a sudden, I was drinking massive amounts and putting on weight, and I couldn't control my body, but yet I was losing weight in other parts of my body. My face and my belly were swollen, but like my arms and my legs were like sticks. Like, it was just, I could not control all these things that I had gone to such great lengths since I was a child to control. It didn't work anymore. And I was drinking and partying and fun to a point, and then it would turn. And then I would just be crying, or I'd be hysterically yelling at someone. And I got in fights, and I would, got kicked out of bars. And I mean, couldn't even legally drink, but I was still going to bars in New York. And, I have two friends that are still in my life, they're like sisters. And, it was constantly people having to like yell and scream at me and be like, you cannot do this. And I got to the point in 2002 where, and again, it was kind of over matters of the heart and feeling like I was completely unlovable and I was miserable and locked in this like dungeon. That's what it felt like. I mean, I was in a prison of, addiction, of, societal expectations of gender. And when, over something that actually didn't matter, it was like over some guy that meant really it was not about him, but it hit something, it hit a chord. And I was in so much pain. And I cut myself, and I cut the back of my hand in like momentary, like I wasn't trying to kill myself but I cut open the back of my hand, and it was really bad, and I was bleeding everywhere. And I called my friend and I said, okay, I cut myself. Can you take me to urgent care or the emergency room? And she called my parents. My parents called 911. 911 starts calling, the police start calling me.
Yeah.
I don't pick up because I'm too scared. And it was all of a sudden, police environment, and I couldn't take it back.
Yeah. And
within a month of that, I attempted to do outpatient rehab. Didn't work. I was going home and getting high, or like going home, lying to my parents and going and getting high. And because I was back in Nebraska. But within a month of that, I was in Minnesota, where I went to treatment for drugs and alcohol. And it saved my life. And I had a counselor. I mean, it was actually the most amazing experience because, I was out as trans, but I wasn't, I was presenting still as a boy. And I hadn't had any medical intervention. And so when
But even, so can I ask you, when you say you were still presenting as a boy, like, so had you not started growing your hair out, or?
I started growing my hair out, but I just looked like I presented very masculine with long hair.
Okay. Yeah.
And all my clothes were still, but I got from the men's section.
Gotcha.
And when I went to rehab, it was like, the units were gendered. So it was like I had to be on the men's unit, and I was terrified because this was my biggest issue that I was dealing with. And I was like, I need to go to an LGBT treatment center, and I need to do this. And, and I knew that one existed, all this stuff. And, the counselor, she was so amazing. She sat me down and she was like, as soon as you look for differences, you will find them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look for similarities, you can find connection with anyone that you meet. And she was like, the men on this unit, they all really like you and they think you're like a great kid. Because I was a kid on the unit. And there was like 15 guys. And I'm so grateful for that woman, because she said that then, and it is something that 22 years later is still something that I take in my everyday life. I take that around with me. And, you know, she said, you know, be willing to go to any lengths for your recovery. And I relocated to Minnesota really against my will. Like, I did not want to, but I was like, okay, I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do. And I went to a halfway house, and I went to a sober house, and then the eating disorder came back. It's like you put one thing down, then other just comes
Whack-a-mole.
right up. Yep.
Yep.
And so at a year and a half sober from drugs and alcohol, I was back in rehab for eating disorder. And that, you know, I'm like, so much of my story that just like kind of like goes, like, I know that we don't have that much time. So like, from there, it's like I find that recovery, but I just found partial recovery at that point.
Right.
Because I was a kid.
Right.
And there was only so much my little brain could do.
Yep.
Because I started medical transition. I started hormones. I had surgeries.
Yeah.
And I went through all these things, and I was sober, and I was on a food plan, and, you know, in recovery. But again, I was just trying to control, like, I mean, they were healthy forms of control. But as far as like my recovery, like it really, and my connection and belief in a higher power and my trust in a higher power, I wasn't willing to give up that control. And I held on pretty tightly for probably 8 years. And then it was a slow, but very insidious unraveling of my recovery, to the point where I would only eat a couple different things. I had started abusing laxatives. I ate like 3 foods, and became very underweight. But I was sober.
Yeah.
Unbelievably depressed, constantly struggling with suicidal thinking. And, you know, this like the terminal uniqueness of thinking that I'm just completely unlovable.
Yeah.
And that I am completely I need to make myself something else for everyone else.
Yeah.
And so at 10 and a half years sober, I mean, my 10-year anniversary from drugs and alcohol, it was sobriety with drugs and alcohol. I sat in a meeting in New York City and I just wept because I wanted to kill myself. And I couldn't understand, but I also knew in the back of my brain, just don't anyone touch my food. Don't anyone tell me, don't anyone take that away from me. And I held on with like a death grip, to the point where I was too scared to gain a pound. And I, at 10 and a half years sober, was living in a sober house in Santa Monica. And with all these young women who are newly in recovery from drugs and alcohol, I'm 10 years sober, but I can't even function.
Yeah.
And then it was like depression. But I knew in the back of my head, this is because I can only eat almonds and carrots. Living in that hell and having that in the back of my mind, being like, I can't stop this. And never had I felt that powerless. Never. I mean, I'd felt that with drugs and alcohol a bit, but this felt like an insanity that I had never experienced, because I wasn't drunk. I wasn't high. I was so desperately in need of controlling my body.
So you explained that you were severely underweight. What were some of the other consequences that were playing out in your body at this point due to how?
I mean, lightheaded all the time. Actually, it was at that point I went from having like this very flat stomach to all of a sudden my stomach just protruded. And it happened in the matter of like weeks. And I became dependent on laxatives to go to the bathroom. And I was constantly trying to navigate if I give up this, if I quit drinking diet soda, and then this will be this, and I'll only eat this, thinking that I can just do it right and my body will do what I want it to, but it never would. And I got into a I went to a rehab in Arizona again for depression because I had a suicide attempt. It was just kind of this unraveling in that last year, 2013. I went to rehab in Arizona. I met a guy while I was in rehab. Ran away from rehab with him. Stayed in a hotel, tried to have a romance.
Those always last.
Yeah, it went really well. And by the time that unraveled, then it was within 3 months. That fear of gaining a pound became so intense. And I was just like, I don't want to go through this hell anymore. Sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to ask, what did you do then?
I decided that I was going to kill myself. And I was living in a sober house. And at that point, I was in Beverly Hills. And sounds so bougie to say that, but
right.
Like I was in Beverly Hills. I went to a guy that I knew kind of had a crush on me, and I asked him if he could get drugs, and he could. And so we got crack, meth, and heroin. First we started with crack, and we got meth and heroin, got a hotel room in Santa Monica, got high for 72 hours. I put him in a taxi and sent him back to the sober house. And it's graphic, but I broke a bottle and I cut my arms for 7 hours in a bathtub. And after 7 hours, I thought I'd done something wrong. Like I was like, I didn't do this right.
Right.
But I was sitting, the water had become cold. So it was actually causing the blood to coagulate. And that's actually probably what saved me.
Wow.
Or it is what saved me. Because I had over 100 stitches in each arm. And because I was smoking crack, meth, and heroin, I was not thinking straight.
Yeah.
And I had lost a lot of blood. And I was like, oh, well, if housekeeping finds me, then they're going to commit me. But if I actually go on my own, I'll be okay and I can get out. Which is like insane. It's insane. And meanwhile, I'm so grateful because the other part of my head, like my sober part, is like, I could have just put the lock on the door, like the deadbolt thing, the chain thing or whatever. And, but that was, the solution was call my friend and like I had done 10 years previous, and say, can you take me to the emergency room? And I cut myself. And again, that friend called 911, and, they, the police found me, and I went to UCLA psych, said, oh, I just relapsed. It wasn't about, I didn't really want to die, which I remember the wound specialist said, because the way that I cut my arms, she's like, you were trying to kill yourself. She knew it. But the doctors let me get away with saying that it was drugs and alcohol. And my therapist fortunately called me out and said, this is your eating disorder. But I still found a treatment center that I could manipulate people in. And I was stealing laxatives. And that's the thing that was so scary to me, is that I was wanting help, but I couldn't get it.
Right. Because that's why it's so important that treatment is such an important responsibility, that you got to refer out if stuff comes up. You got to have rules that are followed no matter what. You got to have eyes everywhere. You got to have, I mean,
and ultimately, no one can make me want it.
True.
And that was, fortunately, I stole these laxatives and I was using them with another girl. We were both using them in the rehab because we lived in this house, and then went to treatment, but they took us to Target and candy stores and all this stuff. Intuitive eating, it did not work for me. But I, at that point, started losing control of my bowels and my sleep. And when that happened, and I had been in rehab for 2 weeks, and I was just like, Joslyn, what, you're going to die. And all you want is to have a little piece of happiness and to be loved.
Yeah.
And I picked up the phone and I called the rehab that I went to when I was 22. And I flew out there, it's in South Florida. And I went through hell for the next 18 months while my body kind of went to where it was supposed to. And for me, my recovery is like no flour, no sugar, and I weigh and measure my food, but I eat 6 times a day. And for 10 years, that's been a godsend for me. And I still, don't weigh myself, and, check in with a nutritionist and try to, I have 12 steps as part of my recovery, but all of that was, giving me a foundation so that I could have the life that I have today.
Yeah.
And, it's like everything that's happened over the past 10 years of my recovery, with sobriety from drugs and alcohol, recovery around my eating disorder, and diving into, looking at how I can go to relationships, I can go to sex, I can go to shopping, and try to find peace. But ultimately, it's this time with recovery, I know more than ever that it's about having a connection to a higher power. Because that's, the only thing that when I put my head on my pillow, when I go to sleep at night, that's where the connection comes.
Yeah.
That's where the peace comes.
It's very true. And we find it in different forms. I'm curious what those are for you. What, when we're talking about solution, no, we're never fixed.
No.
You and I were bonding over that at the GLAD Awards about just like, okay, body dysmorphia is forever. And we just understand that and, love ourselves regardless. We understand that stuff comes up and a feeling will come or a trigger will come. There's freedom in accepting that that's just reality, but also we got tools. So what do you do?
That's a great question.
Because there are so many people that are listening right now. I mean, everyone in this building, right? Well, not many things that you and I bond on, we could all in this building, but I would say so many people, the addiction, the chemical addiction, body dysmorphia, eating disorder, disordered eating, ADD,
Right. Yeah. I got it all.
Yeah. You name it though, like when it pops up, how do you flag yourself?
I mean,
and then what do you do? What are your go-tos to help bring you back to health?
Having fellow sober recovering people in my life. I mean, I would say that's kind of, that's an essential for me.
Yeah.
Because, at 8:00 in the morning when I'm feeling insane or feeling highly triggered by society, I can pick up the phone and express my insanity about my body, or, my clever thinking about what I need to do to fix myself.
Yes.
But I can get on the phone and talk to someone and be like, okay, let's talk this out. Has having my body look a certain way or being a certain weight, has any of that ever actually made me happy? Has any of that stuff, have any of those illusions of control ever made me happy? No, they never ever have. But they're so seductive. And our society is saying like, oh, if you take this pill or do this injection, you will, all of it will go away. Mm-hmm. And, and maybe that's true. Maybe there is that solution. And, but I will say the solution that I have of picturing that I have a higher power in my life that just wants me to love myself. Mm-hmm. That's all loving and all accepting. That's like a warm blanket.
Yeah. So how do you express that now? Because loving yourself just isn't a choice.
Right.
There's that action.
It is actively, one of the biggest things, my ADD is all over the place. One of the biggest things is, there's meetings that I've come across over the years. And one of the things that is talked about is, if there's the first column, second column, third column, and your first column is kind of your red light of things that are active addiction. Mm-hmm. Second column are kind of the slow down signs, the yellow. And then the third column is what takes you towards recovery. And I love that. And it is always creativity. That is the thing that can take you so close to your higher power, to recovery. Mm. And I will say that integrating my recovery integrating my creativity as an artist into my recovery, that is a game changer for me. Because if I'm actively diving into that aspect of myself, I only have access to that if I'm in recovery.
Yep.
And if I nurture that, my recovery gets bigger and I have more of a solid foundation. When I turn away from it, when I look to, social media or some outside thing to fix me, that's when my recovery goes away. Mm-hmm. And I start to go into the yellow, and I start to, all of a sudden, little things will flag up, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to mess with my food. Or I want to run harder at the gym today. Mm-hmm. And because, we talked about the GLAAD Awards, those aspects, I have to live with the eating disorder for the rest of my life. Drugs and alcohol, I get to put down. Mm-hmm. But with the eating disorder, that's a part that I have to constantly take an active part in recovery. And I have to, and I'm so grateful because I have all these angels in my life that kind of are these, this team that takes me towards recovery.
Yeah.
It's therapist, and I work with coaches, and I have so many tools in my life that I feel like when I'm in recovery and when I see people in recovery, those things kind of just come together for people.
Yeah. There's something to be said for the trajectory of healing and those who are seeking to just continually love themselves better, mm-hmm. learn more, do better, be better to others. I'm a big believer that we're all either going one way or the other.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that you talked about those columns. that's really good homework to do. That's really good for people to know what are your markers for your behavior patterns. And only you can answer that.
Totally.
And if this is true, if we're either advancing and moving closer to more recovery, more health, more of a life of thriving, or we're declining, then that is a direct map to understand. And if you have a map, how many times have we said, oh God, if I only had a map to just a guiding. Little did you know that it was actually all within you from the jump to be able to know what it is, what that map is.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I love it so much. And so like the keys to success being like, it doesn't control you anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I ask, and going back to like that connection with the higher power, when I talk to my higher power now, it's like, instead of like asking for things, like one of my favorite prayers is just asking my higher power to help me fall in love with the unknown. Because I have spent so many years of my life trying to be like, okay, what am I, okay, the plan, I got to get this done. I got to do this. I got to do this. But when I like dial it back and I just say, okay, God, please help me be in love with the unknown. And I actually, sponsor I had is the person that kind of gave that to me and imparted that on me. And one day he called me 2 weeks after he originally had said that, ask your higher power to help you fall in love with the unknown. He called me, he said, Joslyn, his sponsor had said to him, ask your higher power to help you fall in love with, I don't know. And I love that because I've spent my entire life trying to know the answer, do it right, get it right. But when I ask my higher power to say, I don't know, that like, God, please reveal to me what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. It takes so much pressure off.
It does.
And like we talked about before, that was so much why I was active in my addiction, because I was trying to relieve that pressure. Mm-hmm. But if I can just turn that over to someone, I mean, granted, it's much easier said than done. Uh-huh. But it's a practice.
It is. Okay, Drew Barrymore moment here.
Okay.
I like this. This is one of the most special parts of the episode. At the end, I always like to ask what I feel like is the most important question, because this is a podcast, and I think that when we get towards the end, there's always there are always those people who stuck around. Not that everybody that's still watching or listening is struggling. I'm not saying that. I'm saying though that there are people that are have stuck all the way through the episode and thinking that they're the only one, they're the only one. Even if we're having this conversation for you, listener, who thinks that you're the only one at this point of the episode, you are worth it. And whatever part you've identified with Joslyn's story, I just want to ask you to give a final word of encouragement to that person.
I would say to anyone who's struggling that by asking for help, I give myself the permission to never have to feel that pain again. Like if I am active in my addiction and I get help, I might have a whole lot of discomfort in not turning to my addiction, but I never have to go through that hell ever again. Because that act of addiction, there's nothing so painful of going through that. Mm-hmm. I didn't eloquently say that, really.
Is that how it was supposed to be said?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, let me be profound, or let me say this, but I mean, truly, it's like that is, there's so much freedom on the other side. And I always need to be reminded that I'm not alone.
That's it right there. You're not alone. Ask for help. There's freedom on the other side. With that, I'll close how I always do. And basically echoing yourself and say that it's never too late to start loving yourself. And you're always only ever one decision away from a completely different life. Thank you so much, Joslyn.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.